Good morning, students. So here we are again with your English class, and our topic for today is from your writing section, and we are doing writing a story. So today we'll learn what a story is and how to write a short story. So first let's understand what a story is. What is a short story and why should we use short stories in class, and why should we write short stories? What is the purpose of writing these stories? So if we go to the definitions of a story, it's a work of art of writing, and it's a work of fiction. Fiction is when it's not based on real thing, when it is not based on facts. So as it is a work of fiction, it involves our imagination. Whatever we are writing in this piece of writing, it is all imaginary. So it is all what we think in our mind, because it's not based on real facts. And a short story can tell of one event in a very concentrated way. That means it is based on one event or one situation. We are revolving around one situation in the whole thing, and it's about people who don't really exist. Why? Because it is a work of fiction. It's not based on true facts. So it is all imaginary, and it can revolve around one event or situation, and it's about people who don't really exist. And it can sometimes describe something at a moment of crisis, like there is some crucial points, there is some crisis in the story. Stories can be based on different situations. They can be different stories. It can be a work of science fiction. It can be a detective story. So it can be so many different stories. So sometimes it can work on a moment of crisis, and it has a plot. That means it is the element of a story, how our story should be based, or what is the foundation of our story, how we have to write a story. We always have to concentrate on the plot and characters who are somehow connected with each other. So a story has a plot and it has characters, and the plot and the characters are connected with each other. That is how a story is spun. It is weaved around a plot and its characters. It has many other elements also. Let's talk about that. First, let's do some more definitions of the story. Now, when we write a short story, these are some of the definitions of a short story. Like E.A. Poe, one of the greatest poets and writers of America, called Edgar Allan Poe, he has described a story, a piece of writing that can be read, that can be finished in just one sitting, or it can be of 1,000 to 20,000 words. That means it cannot be finished in just one sitting. Though one of the writers has described it that a story can be of so many words that it can be just read in one sitting. You don't have to wait for the next time to read it. No, but it can be of more than that. It can be read for more days, and it has a limited set of characters. There can be one main character in the story, or there can be many characters. But if it is based on too many characters, the story can get boring. So it has to be set on a limited number of characters. Characters are the people in the story. We'll go about it in detail. But what are the main components? That it can be very short, or it can be long story, and it should be based on a limited set of characters, a single setting, and a simple plot. Otherwise the whole story can get boring or too complicated for the reader to be interested in reading it. So what is a story? It is a short piece of writing. We are writing short stories in the class since we are beginning to write stories. So we'll be writing short stories. For us, these short stories can be finished in just one sitting, and they are works of art or fiction, which is all imaginary. The characters are all imaginary, or they are not real characters, and there is a plot and setting and so many other things on which our story can be based, and how we can weave a story. Now some more definitions are here. It involves chronology. Chronology is sequence of events. Like it can start, it should have a beginning, and it should move in proper order from one series to another. It should move from one plot to another. Like if we are starting about a story, like you can take Thirsty Crow. He felt thirsty, then what did he do? He went in search of water. That means he didn't go and directly have water somewhere, but he had to fly here and there. So it went on in a proper sequence. It's not that the story begins with there was a thirsty crow and he found a jug of water and had water. No, there are some sequence in between these two settings, the beginning and the ending. So what happened between the beginning and the ending, that all makes the chronology of the story. So chronology is the sequence of events. It should move in a proper order from one sequence to another, and then another, and most probably to the ending. And causation. Causation is the fact that events are somehow connected with each other. It should not go awry. It should not go haywire. Like we are starting with the thirsty crow and we are ending with the monkey and the elephant. No. If we are talking about the crow, and what was the reason, why are we talking about that? That he was thirsty, and we have to prove that he was a very clever crow. So these all should be interconnected with each other, these facts. So it should have a single plot. So causation are the facts that events are somehow connected with each other, and that one event may result from another. Like for example, the thirsty crow goes in search of water, then he looks here and there, finally he settles on a tree and looks down there, he finds a jug, but there is very little water in it. So all these things are resulting from each other. So in the end, he puts those pebbles in the jug and the water rises up. So all these are result from one thing. They lead from one to another. So all these facts should not go haywire, that we will start with the crow and end with the elephant. No. Now see, these are the elements of the story. How we have to write a story. What should we keep in mind when we write the story? These are the 5 elements. First is the setting, like where our story is going to happen. Location and time, where and when, the timing and the place where our story is being set, where we set our story. So that is the important thing. Next is the characters. Who all are the characters in our story? Because our story is always based on some characters. We are always talking about some people, animals, or it can be things. So first element is the setting, where and when, the location, the place and the time on which our story is based. Then who are all the characters in the story. Then it is the plot, series of events on which our whole story is based. Like one thing leads to another. It is not that we are taking one setting from one event and another from another. No, it is not like that. It should have a single plot or storyline on which our whole story is based, and actions and events of the story. Now the main theme or recurrent idea could also be a learn to lesson, and then style, writing techniques, what all we should use, how to make the story interesting, and our vocabulary, what kind of vocabulary we should use. Like if we are writing a science fiction, so obviously our words should consist more of science and all. But if it is a natural setting, in some ideal place, in some natural, like in some it is, we are talking about some village, so our language should be such, our vocabulary should be such that we are describing that kind of place. Or if our setting is in the city, so our words, our vocabulary should relate with the setting. This is how our writing technique should be. So these are the 5 elements of a story. Now going in the details of these elements of a short story. First is the setting. Like I told you, it's where and when. That means the place or the time. Tells the reader where and when the story takes place. It also refers to the mode and tone of the story. Like if it is a city or it is a village, so you have to go about like that, talking more about city or talking more about the village setting. Your vocabulary and your writing technique should relate with the setting always. The plot. Next is the plot. The plot is the sequence or order of events in the story. The plot includes exposition statement. That means the beginning part of the plot, the part of the plot that tells how the story begins. Now next is the rising action. If the story comprises or consists of some climax, so how does the person feel in that situation? What is the person, how does the person deals with the climax? So it is usually when we are seeing a movie or when we are reading a story, we are just so eager to learn what happens next. When there is some excitement in us, when there is some thrilling moment, so we want to know what happens next. So that is the climax, that is a rising action. And then conflict. There can be conflicts in the plot, like there can be some situations, for example, there can be a fight between the hero and the villain, the protagonist and the antagonist. So there can be some conflict. If the story is based on siblings, there can be a fight between the siblings, there can be a misunderstanding in the story. So all these things, they are conflicts in the story, and how the characters deal with those conflicts, that is mostly the climax, rising, falling action. There can be so many things in the story. The setting. After that we have the characters and characterization, like the people, and in some stories the animals that take part in the story. These are the characters, or characters can be people, animals, or anything in the story. Now characterization, how the writer describes those characters, like how they look like, what are their traits, what are their characteristics. Whatever description the writer gives us about those characters is the characterization. So characterization is a description of the personalities of the characters in the story and the way in which an author reveals their personalities. That means how the writer describes the person. It is not that once upon a time there was a boy, he went about in search of his dog. So we have to know a little about the boy, what kind of a boy he was, how did he look like, and what kind of a dog he had, in whose search he went. So story should contain all these elements. First the setting, then the characters. Now we know the character in the story is a boy and a dog, but we should know a little bit more about the boy. So we have to give a little bit of description about the boy. how he looked like. And how we can do that? We can talk about his looks, we can talk about his traits. Was he a good boy, or was he a mischievous boy? So these are the small things we have to describe about the characters. Now, what was the dog like? What was his breed? Was he loyal to his master or not? So these are small small things we have to take care of. So that is called characterization. Now, next is the two identifications of characters. So the main, if you have seen movies, you must have seen our movies. What do they contain? They contain a hero. There is a hero and there is a villain, and there is conflict between them. So the hero is the protagonist and the villain is the antagonist. So there is always a good guy in the story, and not always, but sometime, most of the time, there can be a bad guy in the story. So these are the two main characters of a story. Protagonist is the hero of the story, and antagonist is the villain in the story, who's always opposing the protagonist, and there is always conflict between them. Now, methods of characterization. Creating believable characters. Now that we already know that the story is a work of fiction, but we have to plot it in such a way, we have to plan it in such a way that the reader believes in the characters. He always thinks that these characters are real. He doesn't have this understanding in the mind that, oh, why should I read the story? It is only a fiction, it is only an unreal story. But if there is a good story, a good writer always engages the reader in the story, so the reader never leaves that story till the end. That is how our characterization should be, that we should believe that we are reading something real which has really happened. So that is the element of a good story writer. Now, the methods. Indirect, when he is doing the characterization of the characters. In indirect way, we talk about his physical appearance. Like I said, how the character looks like. How does he speak? What are his thoughts, feelings, or actions of the character? Now, speech, thoughts, feelings, or actions of other characters also, not only about the main characters. Now, and direct, the narrator's direct comments about a character. What the narrator thinks about the character. It is not that we will always know. The narrator will be describing the characters in the real sense, or he can leave some bit for the reader's imagination also. So these are the direct comments about a character by the narrator. Now, the plot we have already discussed. The plot is a sequence or order of events in a story. The plot includes exposition statement, that is the beginning, how the story begins, and rising action when there is the beginning of the climax, when we know that the story has reached the climax. Conflict, the struggles or problems faced between opposing forces. That means there can be a conflict between the protagonist and the antagonist, or any other characters of the story. So, climax. What is a climax? The point of crisis, the crucial point in the plot. It may be the reader's point of highest interest. Yes, when the climax is there, we get most interested in reading the story and finishing, and we are always apprehending what happens next. We are always eager to know what happens, how the characters have dealt with this climax. This is the most interesting part of the story. And when the climax is there, and how these characters are dealing with, how they deal with that conflict or conflicts, after that there is falling action. When the climax is starting, we have the rising action. But as soon as that climax is dealt with, the solution has not reached yet, but as soon as the character begins to deal with the climax, there is falling action. So the excitement is lowered down, and last is the resolution or the solution. So following action is the action in the story after the climax is revealed. So we know about the climax, and the action has begun on how to deal with that climax, and resolution is the solution when that climax is solved, the part of the plot that reveals the final outcome. And these can be types of conflict. It depends on the story we are writing. It can be man versus man, it can be man versus nature, or it can be any obstacle in the society or supernatural. It all depends on the kind of story we are writing or imagining. Or it can be between man versus himself. So it should be based on the kind of story you are writing. So this is the structure of the story, the main part of the climax, when the story on which the whole story is based. We are first reading about the story, we know the location, or we know the setting and the time, we know the plot of the story. Now we have reached the climax. So first is the exposition. Background information establishes the setting and describes the situation. So the story is weaved in such a way that we know the background information about the story. And after that, when the climax is reaching, when the climax is reached, then the rising action happens. Characters face or try to solve a problem. This results in conflicts within themselves or with others. Now the actual climax. Eventually, the story reaches a crucial moment. The tension that is building reaches a peak. Falling action, sometimes called the denouement. This part of the story explores the consequences of the climax. The tension in the story begins to ease. So we have the climax has been revealed. Now the characters in the story know about this climax, and also our excitement has also gone high up. And then when the climax is reached or revealed, the characters start to take action. That is when the falling action begins. And last is the resolution, when they reach the solution, when they solve that climax, when the climax is ended. That is how this structure of the climax is woven in the story. That is how it revolves around the whole plot of the story. And last, what problems a student can face when understanding or planning a story. So this is all about the students. First, they should know about the comprehension, whether they are following the plot or not, understanding the characters, vocabulary, and the role of the narrator. Then they should be motivated. They should be confident. They should find the contents of the stories interesting, or whether they are uninteresting for them. So motivation has to be there, comprehension has to be there, and understanding has to be there. Background of the story, they should know how to appreciate the style of the writing, and they should work on the plot. Actually, they should work on the setting of the story. If you are writing a story, this is what all problems you can be facing. So whenever you are writing a story, the reader should be able to comprehend the story. He should know how to follow the plot. So this is how you have to write your story. This is how you have to follow the sequences or the series of events in the story, and you should always keep the reader in mind. So whether he understands the background of the story, or whether he can comprehend the story, or is he really motivated, or can he make interpretations, like is he confident enough to make his own interpretations about the story? Would he be able to understand your story or read between the lines? This is, if you are going to write a story, what all problems you can face. So you have to weave your story in such a way that the reader should be interested, and he should have a little bit of knowledge of understanding your story. It is not that we will give a science fiction to a 2-year-old story. No, the 2-year-old always understands the simple language, understands simple language, and he's more interested into cartoons, or he'll be interested in animals. So you can't straight away give him some work of fiction which he will not be able to understand. So you have to keep the readers in mind before writing a story. Now that you know what are the elements of the story, we'll explain the same in the next video in very simple language. But this is how a main story is, on which a main story is based, and what are the elements. Main are the settings, plots, characters. After that we can have many other things, conflicts, climaxes and all, but main is the plot, the series of events, whether you are going in a proper sequence or not. You have identified the setting, you have identified the characters. Now what is important? The plot of the story, the series of the events, and whether you have reached that crucial point. Is the reader still interested in reading your story? So always keep the reader in mind, because you will, if you think you can become a good writer, but you have to understand the reader also, his mindset also, his expectations also. So you can be facing a lot of problems in, if you want to become a successful writer of stories. So what you have to keep in mind, the reader always, because you'll be facing lot of problems to invoke the interest of the reader. So what you have to do, you have to understand the reader and try to reach out to him. That is when you can become a very good story writer. So that was all in this video. Now in the next video we will try to do it in a very simple manner.